I used to think weddings were about love, about celebration, unity, and family. But sitting alone in the back row of my sister's wedding, I realized they can also expose everything you've tried to ignore your entire life. My name is Lucy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the invisible one. The sister people forget to mention, the quiet helper, the shadow standing behind everyone else's spotlight. Growing up, Amelia was the light of our house. Everyone adored her, her beauty, her charm, her golden laugh. My mother said she was born for attention, and my father used to joke that she carried the family reputation. Meanwhile, I was the steady one, the practical one, the girl who quietly cleaned up the messes, made sure everyone was on time, and never demanded anything in return. When Amelia got into medical school, my parents cried tears of joy. When I graduated with a degree in literature, they asked, "What can you even do with that?" I smiled, shrugged, and told them I'd figure it out, because that's what I always did. I figured things out, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. Still, I loved them. I stayed loyal. I convinced myself that being reliable was my way of earning love. I helped plan Amelia's engagement party, wrote the speeches, and even designed the invitations by hand. When her florist backed out at the last minute, I found another one within hours. When she panicked about her dress fitting, I spent 2 days sewing tiny adjustments. I told myself it didn't matter that no one noticed, that it wasn't about gratitude, it was about family. But deep down, I kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, this wedding would be different. That for once, I'd be seen not as the helper, but as the sister who mattered too. The wedding weekend arrived like a storm of laughter and expensive perfume. Everyone was buzzing. Relatives flying in, friends taking selfies, the entire house glowing with activity. My parents barely spoke to me except to assign small errands. "Lucy, can you pick up the extra candles?" "Lucy, make sure the guests sign the book." Every conversation seemed to circle back to Amelia, her perfect dress, her perfect husband, her perfect future. I was proud of her, I really was, but the pride came with a dull ache, like pressing on a bruise that never fully healed. At the rehearsal dinner, my mother pulled me aside as I was setting down the place cards. "Try not to wear something too bright tomorrow, Lucy," she said with a smile that wasn't unkind, but careful. "We don't want to draw attention from the bride." I laughed softly, pretending it didn't sting. I told her I'd wear something simple, something invisible. She seemed relieved. That night, I lay awake in my old childhood room, staring at the ceiling covered in the same faint cracks that had been there since I was a teenager. I thought about how many times I had tried to earn their approval, by working 2 jobs through college, by helping Amelia pay her rent once when she was short, by visiting home every holiday, even when no one seemed to notice. I thought maybe tomorrow, when I walked into that wedding looking put together and proud, they might see me differently. Maybe they'd look at me and think, "That's our daughter. That's our other success story." The next morning, I arrived early at the venue, a glass-walled estate on the outskirts of town, draped in roses and gold ribbons that shimmered under the soft morning light. I had been there the night before, helping set up, so I knew exactly where everything was. Still, as I stepped into the reception hall and glanced at the elegant seating chart displayed near the entrance, my stomach twisted. I scanned the list for my name. Amelia and her new husband, Ryan, were front and center at table 1. My parents were seated beside them, naturally. Then came the bridesmaids, the in-laws, the distant cousins, even family friends I barely recognized. But my name wasn't there. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe I was listed under L. Williams or Lucy. Anne. I ran my finger down every list. Twice. Nothing. When I asked one of the coordinators, an overly cheerful woman with a clipboard, she glanced down her notes and said, "Oh, are you with the bridal family? I believe they said to seat you near the back, by the patio doors." The back. The patio. The place where the staff moved in and out, carrying trays and dishes. Away from the laughter, away from the photos, away from them. I walked outside and found a small table tucked near the edge of the terrace. One chair, one name card. It didn't say Lucy. It said guest. I stared at that word until the letters blurred into nothing. Guest. That's what I was to them. Not family, not sister, just someone who didn't belong. My throat tightened, but I refused to cry. I straightened my posture, forced a smile, and told myself it didn't matter. I had survived worse kinds of invisibility. As the music began and guests started taking their seats, I sat quietly in mine. The ceremony unfolded like a dream, white petals floating down the aisle, Amelia glowing in her lace gown, Ryan gazing at her like she was made of sunlight. Everyone around me sighed and smiled. My parents wiped away tears. From where I sat, I could see them clearly, but they never once turned to look for me, not even when the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman away?" My father proudly stood, placed Amelia's hand in Ryan's, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I thought about how he had never said those kinds of words to me. Not once. When the applause erupted and people cheered, I clapped too, quietly, politely, as if I were applauding a play I wasn't part of. Then came the dinner. I lingered near the back as tables filled quickly. I kept waiting for someone to wave me over, to tell me they'd found my seat at the main table, that it had been a mix-up. But no one did. My parents sat beside the bride and groom, laughing, clinking glasses, glowing under the chandeliers. Amelia glanced around the room once, her eyes sliding past me without pause. Maybe she didn't see me, or maybe she did, and chose to look away. I took my seat at the back again, pretending I didn't notice how people whispered as they passed. I smiled at waiters, thanked them quietly, and tried to make myself small enough to disappear completely. My plate sat untouched in front of me. The sound of forks and laughter echoed like a song I didn't know the words to. Then, out of nowhere, someone pulled out the chair beside me. I looked up, startled. A tall man in a dark suit stood there, his tie slightly loosened, a faint smile on his face. His eyes were kind, not pitying, but kind. "You look like you could use some company," he said, his voice warm, easy. I blinked, unsure how to respond. "You don't have to, I want to," he interrupted, settling into the chair. "I'm Ethan." He extended his hand. "Lucy," I said, shaking it. His grip was firm, grounding. He glanced toward the main table, then back at me. "You're with the bride's side, right?" "Unfortunately," I said before I could stop myself. He chuckled softly. Not out of mockery, but understanding. "Family drama?" he guessed. "Something like that." We sat in silence for a moment, the air heavy with laughter that didn't belong to us. Then he leaned back and said quietly, "Well, their loss. This table just became the best seat in the house." I smiled, a real smile this time, small but sincere. For the first time all day, someone looked at me. Not through me, not around me, but at me. As the dinner went on, Ethan made casual conversation. He asked about my work, my hobbies, and my favorite books. No one in my family had ever asked me about those things before. I found myself talking more than I expected, even laughing once or twice. When I mentioned my love for writing, he said, "That fits. You look like someone who pays attention to the things most people miss." I stared at him, surprised by the accuracy of it. He smiled again, and I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest, something like being seen. Halfway through the evening, one of Amelia's bridesmaids wandered past, champagne glass in hand. She did a double take when she saw me. "Lucy, why are you sitting all the way here?" I gestured around. "Apparently, this is my seat." She frowned, visibly uncomfortable. "Oh, well, enjoy the view, I guess." Then she hurried away, her perfume lingering like artificial sweetness. Ethan raised his glass toward me. "Two invisible sisters," he said. I arched a brow. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "Only if you realize that being invisible gives you perspective," he said softly. "You see everything. And one day, when you decide to be seen, the world won't know what hit it." The words caught me off guard. I wanted to dismiss them, but something inside me stirred. Maybe it was the way he said it, with certainty, like he already saw the version of me I hadn't found yet. The music shifted. Couples began to fill the dance floor. I stayed seated, pretending to check my phone, though no messages were waiting for me. I'd been doing that my whole life, waiting for messages that never came, calls that never arrived, love that never noticed. Ethan stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me?" I laughed nervously. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because I'm terrible at dancing. And because my family will stare," he shrugged. "Let them." Something about his tone made it sound simple, like rebellion could be graceful. So I took his hand. And for the first time that night, I didn't care who saw. We moved slowly, awkwardly at first, then in rhythm with the soft music. People did stare. My mother's smile faltered. My father's expression hardened. Amelia glanced over briefly, her perfect lips tightening. But I kept dancing. For a few minutes, I wasn't the forgotten sister. I wasn't the extra name on a guest list. I was just me. When the song ended, Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You don't owe anyone your silence, Lucy." The words sank deep, like an anchor settling at the bottom of my chest. Later that night, when the music faded and guests began to leave, I sat at that same table, alone again, but different. I wasn't broken. I wasn't ashamed. I looked at the empty chairs, the fading lights, and thought, maybe this is what freedom feels like. I didn't know it then. But that quiet moment, the humiliation, the stranger, the dance, was the beginning of everything that would come next. The stranger's name was Ethan, and though the world inside that glittering ballroom revolved around my sister's perfection, he somehow made the air around me feel different, lighter, warmer, almost human again. He wasn't part of my family, not even part of Amelia's inner circle. He was a friend of the groom, invited at the last minute to fill a seat that had been left open. I guess it was fitting that the forgotten guest met the accidental one. While laughter and music poured through the hall like gold spilling from a broken chalice, Ethan and I sat tucked away in our quiet little corner, half hidden by a curtain of ivy and the glow of the chandeliers. He didn't talk much at first. Instead, he looked around the room, noticing the things no one else cared to see. The waiters nervously rushing plates to the main table, the faint smudge of lipstick on the bride's champagne flute, the way my hands trembled just slightly when I lifted my glass. "You don't seem like someone who belongs in the back," he said finally. Breaking the silence with that calm, unshakable tone of his, I forced a small smile. "Guess I missed the VIP list." He tilted his head, studying me. "Or maybe the list missed you." The words caught me off guard. I almost laughed, a quiet, awkward sound that escaped before I could stop it. I hadn't expected kindness tonight, not after being labeled guest at my own sister's wedding. But there was something disarming about Ethan. He didn't pity me. His gaze wasn't heavy with sympathy. It was simply honest, like he saw through all the invisible armor I'd worn my whole life. He asked about me, not about Amelia, not about the family name, not about what I did to help out. He asked real questions. What do you do for work? What do you love to do when no one's asking anything of you? Simple questions, but ones no one in my family had ever asked. At first I hesitated. I told him I worked in publishing, helping other people shape their stories. He smiled and said, "You look like someone who writes, not edits." I blinked, startled. "I used to," I admitted softly. But I stopped. "Why?" I shrugged, staring at the rim of my glass. "Because no one ever read them. It felt pointless." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "That's a shame. The world could use your voice." He said it casually, like it wasn't a compliment but a truth, and yet it landed in me like sunlight breaking through a storm. I didn't even realize how hungry I was to hear something like that, to be told I had worth beyond being useful. Meanwhile, the main table glittered with laughter and flashes of phones. My parents toasted, their glasses clinking in the warm gold light. Every sound from that table used to be my cue, to smile, to clap, to stay small. But for once I didn't move. I let the distance settle between us like an invisible wall. Halfway through dinner, one of Amelia's bridesmaids wandered over, champagne in hand. She looked confused when she spotted me. "Lucy, why are you sitting all the way here?" I gave a small shrug. "That's where they put me," her smile faltered. "Oh, well, at least the view's nice." Then she laughed nervously and walked away, eager to return to the golden circle where she belonged. I felt my face flush, but before the ache could sink too deep, Ethan raised his glass toward me. "Two invisible sisters," he said with a grin. I lifted my brow. "That sounds like a curse." "Not if you decide to be seen," he replied. It was strange, comforting, almost dangerous, to be understood by someone I'd just met. I'd spent years believing silence was safer than rejection, that being small meant being loved. But sitting there with him, I realized how heavy that silence had become. The band started playing again, soft jazz fading into a romantic waltz. Couples poured onto the dance floor, spinning in shimmering patterns of silk and tuxedos. I sat still, pretending to check my phone, though no messages were waiting. There never were. My life was full of conversations that never began, apologies that were never offered, love that was never spoken. Then Ethan stood up, adjusting his cufflinks. "Dance with me," he said simply. I laughed nervously. "I'm not really—" "Neither am I," he interrupted, smiling. "But I don't think you should sit alone tonight." I hesitated. "People will stare," he offered his hand. "Let them." And so, for the first time that night, I let myself say yes. His hand was warm, steady, and unpretentious. As he guided me to the dance floor, the crowd seemed to part slightly, like the universe had made space for something I didn't yet understand. The music wrapped around us, slow, soft, alive. At first, I moved awkwardly, hyper-aware of every step, every curious glance. My mother's smile faltered as she saw me. My father's expression hardened into something unreadable. Amelia turned briefly, eyes flicking toward me like a warning. But I kept dancing. Slowly, carefully, I let the rhythm pull me out of the cage I'd built for myself. Ethan didn't say anything. He just looked at me as though the rest of the world had faded. For a fleeting moment, I forgot about being the helper, the extra, the one who sat by the patio doors. I was just a woman in a dress, dancing because she wanted to. When the song ended, the applause rippled faintly through the room. I stepped back, embarrassed, ready to retreat to my corner again. But Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You don't owe anyone your silence, Lucy." The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. The night unfolded like a slow-motion dream after that. I didn't dance again, but I didn't return to my shell either. Ethan stayed beside me, occasionally teasing me about my serious expression, making quiet jokes about the over-decorated wedding cake, and sharing little stories from his own life. He told me he worked as an architect in Portland, that he'd come to support Ryan because they'd been college roommates. He said he hadn't planned to stay long. He didn't even like weddings. But something about tonight made him stay. "Something?" I asked, smiling faintly. He met my eyes and his voice softened. "Someone." I looked away, pretending to sip my drink, but my heart was pounding. It felt ridiculous. This stranger, this sudden connection. But for once, I didn't want to analyze it. I just wanted to feel it. By the time the night began to wind down, the air was thick with exhaustion and champagne. The newlyweds had left for their hotel suite, the guests were scattered, and the staff had begun clearing tables. My parents were still surrounded by relatives basking in the afterglow of success. They hadn't noticed my absence once. I gathered my purse and stood to leave quietly, the same way I'd arrived. Ethan walked me to the door without asking. Outside, the air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of rain and roses. The string lights above the terrace swayed gently in the breeze. "I should probably say goodbye," I said awkwardly. He nodded. "Or maybe see you later," I smiled faintly. "You're optimistic." "I prefer hopeful," he said, and then, as if remembering something, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. "Here," he said, pressing it into my hand. "What is it?" Proof that you weren't invisible tonight. I unfolded it. His handwriting was neat, firm. You don't need their table to belong. Call me when you're ready to build your own. When I looked up, he was already walking away, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. I stood there for a long moment staring at the words. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I just stood still, the wind tugging at my hair, the lights flickering softly above me. For years, I'd believed belonging was something others granted you. That love had to be earned, that family meant sacrifice. But in that quiet moment, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe belonging wasn't something given. Maybe it was something built. One word, one choice, one brave step at a time. When I finally turned to leave, I glanced back at the hall one last time. Through the glass, I could see my parents laughing with the remaining guests, oblivious to my absence. For the first time in my life, that sight didn't hurt. It just looked small. As I walked to my car, I realized that Ethan hadn't just given me a napkin with kind words. He'd handed me something far rarer, permission to exist outside the story I'd been written into. And I didn't know it then, but that small piece of paper, tucked carefully into my purse, would become the beginning of everything that came after. The new story, the one I'd finally write for myself. A month after the wedding, my phone buzzed one morning with a notification from the family group chat. Pictures of Amelia on her honeymoon. Her white dress replaced by a silk sundress. Her arm draped around her new husband. My parents smiled beside her in another photo, holding cocktails under a golden sky. The captions were full of hearts and laughter. There wasn't a single mention of me, not even a "wish you were here." I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred, then quietly deleted the chat. That moment felt like a final page turning, the quiet sound of something ending without ceremony. No more chasing attention that never came. No more begging for seats at tables that were never meant for me. The silence that followed wasn't bitter. It was peaceful. Like the hush that follows a storm once all the debris has settled. For the first time in years, I started spending my evenings doing something for myself. The apartment I rented was small, just a single bedroom with thin walls and creaky floors, but it felt like a sanctuary. I bought secondhand furniture and a soft rug, the color of sunrise. I cooked simple dinners, sometimes just pasta or soup, and listened to music instead of the endless hum of other people's expectations. One night, while scrolling through my old laptop files, I found a folder labeled Drafts. Inside were stories I'd written years ago, unfinished essays, character sketches, half-forgotten reflections about growing up unseen. Reading them felt like opening a time capsule. I realized how much of my voice I had buried beneath all the noise of trying to please everyone else. So I started writing again. Slowly at first, short journal entries, then paragraphs, then full pages. I wrote about sisters who disappeared in their own homes, about daughters who learned to speak without raising their voices, about small acts of courage that looked like quiet defiance. Writing didn't feel like a hobby anymore. It felt like breathing after holding my breath for too long. One evening, I gathered enough courage to send one of my essays to a local online magazine. I didn't expect a reply. But 2 weeks later, an email arrived. "We loved your piece. We'd like to publish it this Friday." I froze, staring at the screen, rereading the words until they no longer looked real. The essay went live under the title, "To the Sister Who Sat Alone at the Wedding Table." At first, I felt a rush of panic. Would my family see it? Would Amelia recognize herself? But when I read the first few comments, the fear melted into something else entirely. "This was me," one woman wrote. "I cried reading this," said another. A man commented, "Thank you for writing what so many of us never said out loud." Dozens more followed, strangers pouring their stories into the comment section like water into an empty cup. For the first time in my life, being seen didn't feel terrifying. It felt right. The next morning, I woke to a message from an unknown number, "Ethan. I read your story. I recognized the girl who sat alone. You still owe me a dance." I laughed out loud, a real laugh, uncontrolled and bright. It startled me, the sound of it, because I couldn't remember the last time laughter had come so easily. We met for coffee a few days later at a small cafe by the waterfront. The city was waking from winter, and the air carried a faint promise of warmth. When I saw him, he smiled like no time had passed at all. He asked about my writing, about the new apartment, about how I'd been since the wedding. I told him everything, the strange freedom of solitude, the peace that came from no longer needing permission to exist. He listened the way people do when they're not just waiting for their turn to speak. At one point, I admitted, "It's strange. I thought cutting ties would feel lonely, but it doesn't. It feels like I finally stopped shouting into a void." He nodded thoughtfully. "You spent years trying to be heard by people who weren't listening. Now you're being heard by people who actually care." We walked by the pier after coffee, our conversation unhurried. The wind tugged at my coat, and the sunlight shimmered over the water. Just before we said goodbye, he turned to me and said softly, "You know, Lucy, maybe that empty seat at the wedding wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was an invitation to build a new table." His words settled deep inside me like roots finding soil. In the months that followed, I built a life piece by piece. I found a small writing community that met weekly at a bookstore downtown. I started freelancing for magazines, turning my late-night reflections into essays about resilience and quiet rebellion. My pieces began circulating online, one about daughters and forgiveness, another about learning to stop apologizing for taking up space. People started calling me the storyteller of the unseen. The title made me smile because it wasn't just about writing, it was about reclaiming something I'd lost long ago. My own narrative, my parents still called sometimes, though never to ask how I was. My mother's voice always carried that same polite distance. She'd talk about Amelia's latest achievements, her promotion, her house, her pregnancy, and pause as if waiting for applause. I learned to keep my replies short and kind, but detached. "That's wonderful," I'd say. "I'm glad she's doing well." Then I'd hang up, heart steady, unshaken. No anger, no bitterness, just boundaries. Amelia reached out once through a short message. "I read your story. I hope it wasn't about us." I never responded. Some silences are their own kind of closure. Around the same time, Ethan and I started meeting more often, sometimes for dinner, just to talk. We never rushed anything. He had a way of making the world feel calm, like everything didn't have to be solved all at once. One evening, he showed me a project he was working on, a table he was building from reclaimed wood. The surface was uneven, the edges imperfect, but it was beautiful. "I like things that have history," he said. "Every scratch, every flaw, it's proof that it survived something." I traced my fingers along the rough grain and smiled. "Like people." He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "Exactly like people." Weeks turned into months, and life became a rhythm I didn't need to earn. I woke up early, brewed coffee, wrote at my desk by the window, and walked through the park in the evenings. The world still carried noise, Amelia's social media updates, my parents' Christmas newsletters, but it no longer drowned me out. My life had its own music now, softer, truer. One afternoon, the magazine invited me to speak on a podcast about emotional healing and family boundaries. I hesitated at first, worried that speaking aloud might reopen old wounds. But then, I remembered that younger version of myself, the girl sitting at the back of the wedding hall clutching her silence like armor. I owed it to her. During the interview, the host asked, "What does revenge mean to you now?" I smiled. "It used to mean proving them wrong," I said. "Now it means living right. Peace is the quiet kind of revenge, the kind that doesn't need witnesses." The episode went viral overnight. Thousands of people shared it with captions like, "This healed something in me," and, "Finally, someone put it into words." I read the comments and cried, not out of sadness, but gratitude. Every story I told permitted someone else to tell their own. A few weeks later, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a photo, the wooden table Ethan had finished building. Across the surface, Carved carefully in the wood were the words, "For the people who belong." No note, no signature, just that message. I placed the photo on my desk beside my laptop, right next to the framed copy of my first published essay. I wasn't the forgotten sister anymore. I wasn't the invisible one or the afterthought at the edge of someone else's story. I was the woman who finally took her seat, at her own table, on her own terms. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I light a candle and sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker like constellations. I think about that wedding sometimes, not with pain, but with perspective. I remember the sound of glasses clinking, my mother's laughter, Amelia's glow, and then the small moment that changed everything, a stranger pulling out a chair beside me. That moment taught me something no amount of family validation ever could, that you can't force people to see you, but you can choose to see yourself. Now, whenever I pass a wedding venue and hear laughter spilling out, I smile. I don't envy the people inside. I just hope that among the guests, somewhere in the back, there's another woman like I once was, quiet, invisible, unsure, and that she knows her worth isn't defined by who saves her a seat. Because sometimes the seat they refuse to give you becomes the place where you build your own kingdom. And peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of betrayal. It's the life you create when you stop needing applause from people who never clapped for you. That's my revenge. And it's beautiful.